Okay, so I'm about to start building the first project that you guys voted on, and about 50% of you chose the storage bench. Make sure you keep doing the quizzes, do a good job, and this could be yours at the end of the week. One of the pages I want you to become familiar with, though, is the materials list. All right here on this page, you'll see the materials list, and I want you to start to understand what the materials list is, so that when you do get back here and you do start building your projects, you'll know how to keep track of all your pieces as we move along. So as we look at this first post, this piece has to end up being 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 square. This piece is a little bit larger than what this table saw blade can cut all at once. If you look here, the blade is at its fullest height and it can't cut all the way through the piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the blade just a little bit on the first cut. It doesn't need to be quite this high because I'm going to cut about a little more than halfway through. I'll flip it over and I'll cut halfway through on the other side. I'm not going to cut this to exactly 1 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to leave it a little bit oversized so then I can go ahead and I can plane it down to exactly 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 after my table saw cut. That will get rid of the saw marks in the piece. So because I'm working alone, cutting that long post on the table saw would be unmanageable for one person. So what I'm going to do first is I'm bringing it over to the radial arm saw and I'm going to cut it into shorter lengths. I won't cut the lengths perfectly yet. Wait until after it's already been squared and cut down to a width and thickness, and then I'll cut the finished length when I'm all done with that. So now I'll square the end, cut off the little bit of a split that's there, and I'll make my measurement and make the rest of the cuts. I don't have quite enough left to make the final leg. However, something I wanted to show you. This piece here has a terrible split in it, but we're only going to need 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. So we're going to get rid of that split anyway. So I'm going to make a cut on this one as well. That ought to make it more manageable on the table saw. Let's head over there now. We're going to cut it to 1 13/16. I'm just going to leave an extra 16th that we can plane off later. Now I'm going to lower the blade just a touch, just so I'm getting through that cut just slightly, and I'm going to make the other cut. You can see there's a little bit of a line left where that saw blade didn't quite line up. We're going to plane that down. That's why I left the extra. Now I'll raise the blade so you just have about a half a saw tooth above that piece. I'll cut it the other way to 1 13/16. Now we'll run them through the planer and cut off that 1/16 of an inch that I already left behind. I've checked each of the legs for what side just got sawn. I look for saw marks, and those are the 2 sides that I want to plane off and clean up. And now they're ready to go and get cut to length. The front legs are supposed to be exactly 18 inches long. So what I've done is I marked one, I lined it up, and I set up a stop block, just like we did the other day in the radial arm saw video. So I'm going to cut those 2 front legs right now. I'm going to do the same thing for the rail legs now. How to set up a stop block? This is how it's done. So I've marked the board exactly 30 inches long, which is what the plan calls for. I made sure that the blade was lined up at 30 inches. All I'm going to do is take my clamp, take my stop block, put it right up against the end of my piece, and lock that clamp in that block to the fence. Now anytime I take a piece and put it against the end of that, it'll be 30 inches every time. Let's cut these 2. Now that my legs are cut to length, I'll be able to go ahead and sand them and do whatever else I need to do to them. Now that we have the legs squared and cut to length, there are a few more things that we need to do with them. If you look at the plan, you'll notice this is the leg right here. We have a mortise that we have to create up at this top part, another mortise at the bottom, and then a groove for the side panel to fit into. And then when it's all said and done, we're just gonna round off the bottom a little bit. Before we do those mortises in the legs, we're gonna create the rails next. That way we can create both mortises at the same time. I just want to point out one thing. Something that I want you to get used to. When you look at a materials list, which is found right here, here's the materials list, you can see that there are letters all the way down the sides here. A letter corresponds with a part. Part A, we just created the front legs, right? And we needed 2 of them. And this was the dimensions that they were. Thickness by width by length. Now part B is one we're making next. Okay, we're gonna make the front rail. There's 2 of them. They are a thickness of 3/4, 2 inches wide, and 42 inches long. Okay, so that's how you read each individual piece. Almost like they were the ingredients for a cake, something like that. As you read down the ingredients list, you see how much you need of each, how much of a measurement you would need in a recipe. This is basically the same thing. So woodworking is no different than just baking a cake. So now what I'd like to do, in order to create these 2 front rails, I see that they're 2 inches wide. I have a piece that's about 5.5 inches wide, so I know I can get 2 rails out of the width of a 5.5 inch piece. 2 plus 2 is 4. It'll be a little less than the 5.5 inch piece, plenty of wood there. I'm gonna cut 1 piece to 42 inches, and then we'll rip it into 2 pieces on the table saw. Remember, before we can cut this piece down to 42 inches, we have to check the end, make sure there's no splits or cracks. If there was, we would cut them off. And we're gonna square this just to be sure that we have a 90-degree angle. Also, all the wood we buy here has one edge that's already been ripped and the other edge is rough. We're gonna make sure we put that ripped edge against the fence when we make that cut. Let's do it. There's the line. Okay, I'm about to make a cut at 2 inches. First, I'm gonna set the blade height because we were just cutting those legs and the legs were 1 inch and 13/16. So we're gonna have to lower that. And secondly, I'm gonna set the fence exactly 2 inches wide. Now, if you wanted to, you could leave it a little bit bigger, say 1/8 of an inch wide, and then go over to the joiner and joint the 16th off each edge. In this case, I don't think it's necessary because we're gonna be sanding a little bit later on, and everything, all these pieces that we're making now will be painted white. So let's take a look. Now we have our 2 front rails ready for mortises. And here's a good tip of the day. What you want to do when you're done making pieces, we have a list of pieces over here, probably 17 to 20 pieces. We want to keep track of that to stay organized. So that part was part B. So we're gonna put a B on our piece and circle it. We're gonna put a B on the second piece. These are the front rails. And if you keep track of that and stay organized, it's a good habit to get into. Next up on our materials list are front and back cleats. They're only gonna be 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch and 42 inches long. So this piece that I just cut off, the front rail, will make one of them. And I've got another piece to make another one. I'll go cut this to 42 inches long, and then we'll rip a couple down to 3/4. And there you have it. We've got part D. The next part is part F. It's the rear top rail. We only need one of them, and it's going to be 3/4 of an inch thick, 3 inches wide, and what do you know, 42 inches long. I have just the piece right here. Let's rip that down to 3 inches now. And here is part F. We're moving right along. Our next piece is the rear center rail. It needs to be 4 3/4 of an inch wide, so I needed to grab a new piece of wood off the shelf. When I tell you to look for splits and cracks, this one's not hard to find. We'll cut that off and I'll cut another one to 42 inches. Now, although I had to take this crack right off the end of that board, it's not something that you need to throw away, okay? There's still some good wood that we could use here. We got a width right here that we could use, and this side probably would get thrown away. But we've got all this that we could use. So we don't just chuck it if it has a crack. We keep it and use it for another piece. I've got 2 more rip cuts to make, and that'll make 2 more pieces, G and H. There's 2 more pieces checked off our list. The next piece on the list will probably be the final piece I do today. It is the back slats. The back slats, we need 11 of them. They're 1/4 inch thick, 2 inches wide, and 7 3/4 inches long. So I'm gonna show you how we can get the best use of our wood as we make those slats. So we need 12 pieces, 11 pieces, but we're gonna make an extra one, okay? So I've taken a piece and I've cut it to 24 inches. All right, the pieces need to be 7 3/4 inch long when they're all done. I rounded it up to 8 inches to give us a little space to cut in between. So 8, 8, and 8 will give us 2 pieces for each thickness. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it twice this direction, 2 inches and 2 inches, and we're going to cut it in half down to, so we can get our 2/4 inch pieces this direction. So for each one of these 8 inch pieces, we're actually going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces out of each one. So we got 4 here, 4 here, and 4 here, for a total of 12 slats. Let's get that started. First I'll cut them 2 inches wide, and then I'll set the fence and the blade height a little bit different, and we'll cut them all in half. Now I'll reset the blade height by putting my board next to it. And again, we'll raise the blade till we have about a half a sawtooth. And I want to guesstimate the middle. We're going to plane it down to a 1/4 inch afterwards to get rid of the saw cuts. One of those pieces was a little bit thinner than the other. I wasn't perfect on that. Let's see where we're at. We're still 0.3. So we have a little bit that we can plane off. Perfect. So I've adjusted the wheel. I brought it up till it hit the black spacer, and I brought it back a little bit more than 2 turns. I don't want to go too far on this particular cut. I want it to be just 0.25 when I'm done. We can go a hair more, so I'm going to flip them and do the other side. They're at 0.26. That's good enough for this job. This is actually a great opportunity for you guys to see how the stop block works with a really light piece of wood. Now, if I put the stop block on the other side of the blade, that piece would be trapped between the stop block and the blade without my hands on it. This piece is long enough where I can set it up on the left-hand side of the blade. That way I can still have my hand on that piece that's stuck between the fence and the blade, and it won't come up. It's a good thing to do and a good habit to get into when you're dealing with thin stock that can lift, because the air that the blade creates can actually lift a light piece. So we're going to do that right now. My left hand will hold it down, but I'm still only going to come out just far enough to cut through it. And there you have it. All the back slats are made. I even have one extra. I won't label them all. These are pretty obvious what they are. Okay, that's it for today. Tomorrow, I'll continue down the list and see how much we can get through. And then we're going to move on to joinery. See you tomorrow.